Hi, I'm Alex, this is Harry, and we're going to take you through a timeline of the Christmas story.
Yes, and you might think you know it, but when you look at things up to the birth, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see all the characters of the story and where they fit.
Yes, and especially interesting to see how all the history fits into it. So, shall we get going?
Well, where do we start? Do we start at the beginning, or do we start in the middle?
Go from Zechariah and Elizabeth, and we'll build a picture going backwards and forwards where we need to, okay?
Right. In that case, it's 15 months before the big day, and a man called Zechariah is in the temple.
Zechariah is a priest, and he and his wife have no children, even though they are old. So culturally, that is a difficult thing back in the day. Zechariah and Elizabeth would have both been seen as hugely blessed to be priests, but at the same time, there'd have been great suspicion about them because they were childless, and people would have seen that as some kind of punishment for maybe something that they had perhaps done. Aha! But it's all part of putting things in the right place at the right time.
So,
Yes.
on this day, 15 months before Jesus is born, Zechariah is chosen at random to set up the temple worship for the day in a sacred inner room. While he's there, alone, an angel appears and tells him that his wife Elizabeth will have a boy, and the boy is going to be the one who will prepare people for the arrival of the saving Messiah. He is going to be John the Baptist.
Yes, Elizabeth falls pregnant even though she's too old to have children anymore, and they are super happy. Super happy.
Yes. 6 months into the pregnancy, an angel comes to see Mary. Mary's Elizabeth's cousin, but she lives way at the other end of the country in Nazareth. The angel tells Mary that she's going to have a baby, even though her and her fiancé have never been together. And the baby will be nicknamed Emmanuel, which translates as something like God is here with us, or the God-man.
So, here's where the timeline goes way back into the past, because that phrase, Emmanuel, actually is given by one of God's prophet called Isaiah around 800 years before the birth of Jesus.
So the angel quotes that to Mary, who is aware of it, and she asks, how can this even be possible? The angel says God's Spirit can make all things possible. And he lets her know that her cousin Elizabeth is pregnant. In fact, Elizabeth's now in her 6th month. And Mary says, yes, let it be.
Joseph, her fiancé, hears about it, and he assumes she's been with someone else. But God sends him an angel too in a dream, and he decides that he'll commit to Mary, and he'll commit to the baby and their family.
Great. A few days later, Mary is shipped off to see Elizabeth, and when the two women meet, the baby in Elizabeth's womb leaps for joy because the unborn child can literally sense the presence of Jesus inside Mary.
Then, Mary stays with Elizabeth for 3 months until Elizabeth's baby is about to be born. So, 3 months. There we are, that's the birth of John the Baptist.
So, here we are now. We're 6 months before the birth of Jesus. Mary is obviously pregnant and in Nazareth again. Everything's fairly stable for those last 6 months, except that around 2 weeks before the big day, a Roman census gets announced right close to her due date.
Yes, the census. We need to go back about 31 years before the birth, all the way back into Rome, because Caesar Augustus becomes the emperor of Rome 31 years before. He's in place and has been ruling for just over those 30 years before he makes this decision to count all his empire. Possibly he knows he's coming to the end of his time on this mortal coil, but whatever the reason, around 2 weeks before the happy couple hear the news.
So around 5 days before the birth, they set off to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem. That's where Joseph's family line comes from, and where King David was born.
King David, that's important because there are prophecies about Jesus that says he will come from the family line of King David. And David was born about 1,040 years before Jesus. So that sets up the place for Jesus to spring into the world a full millennia before it happens.
Well, so we finally reach the launch day. Mary and Joseph arrive in this packed out town full of everyone who wants to be on the census as being related to King David.
And there's no room for them in their lodgings. They have to kip down where the animals are kept, on the bottom floor of a house, like a garage of a large family home.
the angels immediately appear to some shepherds in a field outside of Bethlehem, telling them the Saviour of the world's been born. They go straight down and find them, and the baby is still in the manger. So we're talking it's the same night.
Same night, right, yes. And usually, in this part of the story, we now jump straight to the Magi, the wise men. But there's a significant event that happens between.
Yeah. We've got to ask ourselves a question. Why do Mary and Joseph stay where they are?
Why?
They only came for a census.
Why? Well, the Jewish scriptures tell us that when you have your first child, you must dedicate him to God 8 days later. 8 days later. Bethlehem is next to Jerusalem, and Mary's already done a week to get there, so they hang around until day 8.
On day 8, they mooch into the temple to dedicate the baby.
Yes. To understand this part, there are 2 more characters who jump into the story. The first is Simeon. Now, we don't know the exact timings for this, but somewhere in the last 30 years, Simeon has heard from God that he will see the Messiah before he dies. And on this day, the 8th day of Jesus being alive, he is in the temple.
But there's also a lady called Anna. Her story is even more incredible.
Yes, Anna is a young lady who gets married, but only 7 years into her marriage, her husband passes away. She decides to dedicate all of the rest of her life to God, and God starts to use her as a prophet. He speaks through her, and she stays in the temple day and night, basically living there, and she does that for the next 70 years. She's around 84 when this day happens. 70 years ago, she moves into the temple, and God has her in the same place at the same time as Joseph, Mary, Jesus, and Simeon, all at the same time.
So they bring Jesus in, dedicate him according to their customs, and Simeon sees him, and he starts holding him and praising God. This is the one! And then Anna joins in, and finally we get to the Magi, or the wise men. So when are they around?
Well, opinion is divided here. Some people think they arrive up to 2 years later.
Well, why would they think that?
Because they go into Jerusalem for a start, and they pop to the palace of Herod the Great, who, by the way, was in place as a ruler 37 years before Jesus was born. Yes, and Herod asks when did this all start? And he goes and kills all the boys under the age of 2.
So people think that the Magi were around when Jesus was 2.
But it's unlikely.
Oh, why is that?
Because Joseph had a business, and Mary had friends and family, and they have a new child. I mean, are they going to want to stay in Bethlehem for 2 years, or are they going to want to go home?
Yeah.
What do you think?
They probably want to go home.
Exactly. Yes. So the journey for the wise men and the Magi, it would only really have taken 10 to 15 days to get there. So we are probably talking straight away, which makes sense too. So 8 days they go to the temple, and now 10 to 15 days they're spending their time packing up to take the baby back up north. So when Mary and Joseph are upstairs and the Magi arrive, they probably are in the process of packing, which is very important because they're not going to be able to go home.
Yeah, they're not, are they?
Yes.
Right. So the Magi arrive. They see King Herod the Great. He gets his own wise advisors to try and figure out where the baby might be born. This king of the Jews.
Yes, and the advisors say Bethlehem because 500 years before, Alex,
500
Micah, another prophet, says that the Saviour is going to be born in Bethlehem.
And the star?
Oh, this is even more exciting because 1,200 years before all of this, a foreign Magi type is employed by Israel's enemy to curse Israel. They grab a guy called Balaam, and instead of cursing Israel, God speaks through Balaam and says one day a star will rise from Israel, a ruler will rise up for all the people. So he goes off home to the east, where the Magi come from, and the Magi priests, ever since that point, are watching the skies for this star for around 1,200 years. Yes,
come on.
Yes,
that's amazing.
It gets even better because Matthew loves all this ancient stuff. So the wise Magi find the baby, and Herod gets all paranoid and orders the death of all the kids. Well, that is a throwback to Moses. One of the things we know about the Messiah is he'll also be like Moses. So when Moses is born, the Pharaoh decides the Jews are a threat, and he orders the death of all the newborn children as well. That's just before Balaam's prophecy, maybe 80 years before. So we're talking 1,300 years before Jesus.
Then Jesus and his family have to go into exile as refugees. They go to Egypt to hide.
Yes, but only until Herod the Great dies, which is around 4 years after Jesus is born. So he would have grown up in Egypt until he was about 4 or 5, maybe a bit later, and they would have moved back home to Nazareth in the north of Israel.
Wow. Well, there you have it. The story that is getting prepared for Jesus from 1,300 years before.
At least. But there's more, but it's not connected to the birth story.
Okay, well, perhaps we can get you back another time to talk about that.
Well, you know where I am.
Yes, I certainly do. I certainly do. Happy Christmas, everyone.
Happy Christmas. Happy Christmas. You were amazing.
Well done.
No, I fluffed my lines, and I couldn't count.